Namo Buddhaya. Hello and welcome to the Buddha Dharma TV. I am Agnes Gay. Today we kick off our program with the Narasiha Gatha, also known as the stanzas or the Lion of Men. These verses were uttered by the Princess Yasodhara, the consort of Prince Siddhartha, to her son Rahula. She shared them during the Buddha's first visit to Kapilavatthu, his hometown, after attaining enlightenment. Today, these verses will be recited by Visarada Sirima Ratnayaka, a popular singer from Sri Lanka.
Narasiha Gatha. Chakvaran ki terat supadu Lankan mandit ayat panhi Chamar chat vibhusit padu Isa hi tui hai pita narasiho Satya kumar varo sukhamalo Lakhan vistat punna sariro Lokahitaya gato narviro Isa hi tui hai pita narasiho Punna sasangha nibhamka vanno Deva narayana piyo naranado Matte gajinda vilasita gami Esa hi tui hai pita narasiho Khatiya sambhava anga kulino Deva manusa namasanjita padu Sila samadhi pasindita citto Esa hi tui hai pita narasiho.
Our next segment features Venerable Arya Dhammika as he explains convincingly about a topic that many people very often question. What is early Buddhism? Here is Venerable Arya Dhammika of Austria to talk on the topic of what is early Buddhism. And it is the first part.
Thank you, Eric, for the kind introduction. I'm glad to be here this evening. And also greetings everyone from Taipei SPS Monk Training Center. Actually, just yesterday, at the same time, this time around, there was a heavy downpour of rain. When that happens, you can barely hear your own words. And there would have been no way that we can conduct our Dhamma session with that weather. It would be so noisy that you would not be able to understand anything. But today, we're quite lucky, huh? It's not raining tonight. But maybe you still won't be able to understand much. Not so much because of the rain, but because of my Austrian accent. Anyway, I'm trying to adapt already, but not easy, huh? Little bit speak Malaysian English can, but passe, huh? Anyway, Today I would like to speak a bit about early Buddhism. And I wanted to ask you first, what do you think is the meaning of early Buddhism? What do you understand when you hear this term? Maybe I give you a few seconds or a minute. Key in Facebook in the comment section. I'm curious to see what you think early Buddhism could mean. Is it about Theravada or Mahayana or about suttas? Or, don't know. Key in a few words what you think is early Buddhism, what that stands for. You can leave it in the comment section. I'm sure some of you will have heard this term before, early Buddhism. But what are they meaning when they say this? Okay, let me see the comments. Have a brief look at the comment section. All right, so you had your chance to express what you think is early Buddhism, and now I will try my luck. In today's talk, first off, I would like to highlight a bit the importance of a non-dogmatic approach to Dhamma studies and practice. And the emphasis is really on non-dogmatic. What does that mean? It means that we look for evidence and we want to understand, despite of our maybe preconceived ideas or views or things that we have accepted from somewhere or somebody. And this non-dogmatic approach is very important for learning anything, not just the Dhamma. Being open to new ideas, being open to check whether our old ideas are the correct or not. And often they are, sometimes maybe not, or maybe only partly. So being open allows us to welcome new teachings or new insights, new knowledge. In the synopsis of this talk, it was already said that emphasis will be given on the method of putting early Buddhist texts side by side and looking for commonalities among them, and in this way identifying teachings of high authenticity. Then later, I would also like to highlight a few popular misconceptions about aspects of the Dhamma which maybe many of us wrongly believe in. And these fake teachings, we have fake news, we have also fake Dhamma. These fake teachings are usually the result of historically later developments, not the original teachings of the Buddha. So in the next 45 minutes, we will do a bit of detective work, a bit like Sherlock Holmes, with a pipe. You can sit down with a pipe, with a magnifying glass, and do a bit of detective work about the Dhamma now. Also, I would like to invite, if you have any questions, please feel free to key them in on Facebook, and we can then discuss them at the end of the session. Let me give you a little bit of my own first contact with Buddhism. My own first contact was actually not with Theravada Buddhism. I was first attracted or got in contact with Tibetan Buddhism. And I was particularly inspired and drawn in by their charisma and kind of nice attitude of the Dalai Lama in particular. So it's kind of quite a likable person, I find. But then later, after a while, I discovered, in Tibetan Buddhism, there's also a lot of rituals, like prayers, music, and very little emphasis on meditation, which I was really most interested in. So I found it strange, They had Buddhism, was supposed to be everything about meditation, but mostly what I heard and what I saw the monks also doing was spending a lot of time for prayers, for chants. And then I kept searching, kept my ears open. And then I found out about Theravada Buddhism, which seemed much more authentic in this sense. What I thought this will really be now, what I can imagine the Buddha would be teaching. I could not imagine that the Buddha was very much drawn into rituals and belief systems. I would much more imagine that the Buddha was more interested in meditation, teaching the Dhamma in a very straightforward way, nothing mystical. So that's what brought me to Theravada, the simplicity and also the earliness of the teachings. And I was very drawn in by that. Always going back to the source. So then I eventually became a monk in Myanmar, in Burma, in Baok. I practiced according to the methods taught there and had good experiences. So that fitted quite well for me, I have to say. And as many of you know, in Myanmar also there is not only the Vinaya, but also the Dhamma and also the Abhidhamma very strongly emphasized. And then after some time, somebody told me, you know, this Abhidhamma, some people say, yeah, this Abhidhamma, this came a bit later. It's not so sure that this is really the earliest teaching of the Buddha, he said to me. I looked at him, what are you talking about? I came to Theravada Buddhism. Theravada Buddhism stands for early Buddhism, isn't it? Now you're telling me this is also not early, what we are doing here? So I was not happy with this monk who told me. Anyway, I kept practicing, but I still kept my ears open. Also, some people recommended to read the suttas. And more, I also started to see some passages where there seemed to be discrepancy between the Abhidhamma teachings and the suttas that I was reading. And then, in this way, I became a little bit aware of this discussion going on. And also the suttas themselves, they are nowadays also interpreted by the commentaries and explained by the commentaries, the true meaning, supposedly. So again, but the commentaries also are a bit later development often. They're early commentaries, they're later commentaries, they're sub-commentaries, they're sub-commentaries. So then eventually I came to understand, well, maybe that's also not the earliest one, but at least the suttas, the suttas I can rely on. Then I felt happy. Okay, I got my early teachings. You know what happened then? Somebody else came along and he said, even the suttas also have undergone some evolution. And even there, we should not believe it's exactly the word of the Buddha. Should compare with other early teachings from other schools. Really? Now even the suttas I cannot rely anymore. But what I'm telling you is, I was always interested in coming closer and closer to the original Buddha's teachings. There are so many teachings in circulation, and I'm sure many of you have noticed that, especially here in Malaysia, you encounter monks coming from Thailand, from Burma, from Sri Lanka, from overseas, from the West. And many of them are in line, but also many of them contradict each other a little bit. But my own core interest, was never so much what does Guru X or Sayadaw Y or Ajahn Z, Swami Vahamsa, Lama or Rinpoche, so-and-so, what are they teaching? That was never my core interest. My interest was always, what did the Buddha teach? What did the Buddha really teach? Because to me, and I think to many of us, if not all of us here, the Buddha, as we know, is the first refuge. It's a refuge. And not just the Buddha alone, there's also the teaching, his teaching, the Dhamma, that he formulated and shared with us. That's the second refuge. So for me, I almost see it as my duty to try to investigate and play Sherlock Holmes, trying to find out what was the Buddha really teaching. Because we cannot deny we're living 2,500 years after the Buddha, so surely it is to be expected that there will be a little bit of evolution, development of the Dhamma. Certain things may be forgotten, and often unintentionally texts having been corrupted. But always my interest, what did the Buddha teach? So as I said earlier, so many different teachers coming from here, from there, and some of them having a really great reputation as masters, meditation masters. And they have a lot of disciples. Then always the question, whom to trust? There's so many. Then I came across one discourse, one sutta. It's called the Mahapadisa Sutta, Anguttara Nikaya 4.180. And there the Buddha explains, when you hear somebody teach something that sounds like the Dhamma or the Vinaya, remember it. And then compare it with the suttas and the Vinaya. If it's included and found within the suttas or the Vinaya, then you should hold it. Yes, this is the Buddha's teachings. But if it's not included in the suttas and the Vinaya, then you should put it aside. You should discard it and conclude, no, this is not the Buddha's teachings. So it's a very simple principle and very applicable, especially in our current time and age, where we have so many different teachings floating around. So the Buddha recommended to find out what is really the Dhamma. Take the Dhamma that is already established in the suttas, in the Vinaya, and compare whatever we hear, regardless of whether it comes from a renowned teacher with many followers, or just from a small samanera. Whoever says it doesn't really matter. We just compare it with the Buddha's own teachings, the suttas and the Vinaya. And that turned out for me to be very practical advice and guideline. But by doing that, I also noticed sometimes something that I thought is the Buddha's teachings, or that I thought, yeah, this is really said by the Buddha. Sometimes I later find out, no, actually it was not. So then also again, we need the willingness to change our opinions, to take in new information and adapt and adjust our perspective accordingly if new evidence comes along. Like this is what I earlier meant with a non-dogmatic approach to Dhamma studies and practice. A little bit, often it's recommended a meditator should be like an empty cup. Like a cup here, let me check first. Yeah, it's an empty cup. So that's how a meditator should be. Because if you have an empty cup, you can put water or whatever liquid you want inside, and it will contain that valuable liquid substance, and it will hold it. But if a cup is full already, brim full, like a person full with ideas and views about the Dhamma, about the practice, everything, you know everything already, then whatever water you pour in, it will just overflow. Or like a cup upside down. Also, you can try as much as you want. People might give you, people might come, they will try to pour the true Dhamma, the pure Dhamma inside, but the cup is upside down, cannot hold anything, still empty. So in this way, we should be like an empty cup. and then absorb whatever seems reasonable and right. In fact, there's a very famous sutta about this. It's called the Kalama Sutta. Can we see a slide about the Kalama Sutta? The Kalama Sutta says, Kalamas, do not go by reports, by legends, by traditions, by scripture, by logical conjecture, by inference, by analogies, by agreement through pondering views, by probability, or by the thought, this contemplative is our teacher. This contemplative is our guru. So by these things we should not go. But when Kalama, you know for yourselves, these things are unwholesome. These things are blameworthy. These things are censured by the wise. These things, if accepted and undertaken, lead to harm and suffering. Then you should abandon them. So that was the Buddha's advice to the Kalamas. So it's a very practical guideline. And the important part is here that even scriptures are also not holy, Even scriptures cannot always trust. So sure, scriptures often contain very ancient knowledge and often can help us. But even scriptures, we need to double check them, especially nowadays where the scriptures are so old and have been passed down for so many years. But also don't go just by logic or by what you like, because that's also not a reliable guide. But if you practice something and you see your wholesome qualities increase, the unwholesome ones decrease, that's something reliable to be guided by. However, the Pali Suttas are a very good starting point, I would say. Even though it has been pointed out by several scholars that they do have undergone some evolution and development, until they were finalized at the Third Council at about 300 BC, meaning 300 years before the Common Era. This means 200 years between the Buddha's Parinibbana and the closing of the canon. 200 years have passed. And only after that time, the canon, in the Pali canon, in the Theravada tradition, was considered closed, and no new things could be added or removed. But the first 200 years, that was not yet the case. But the Pali canon is, of course, the best that we have, right? Well, it is partially right. The Pali discourses are the earliest complete recording of the Buddha's words. The emphasis is on complete. But there are also records of selected discourses or entire chapters or books originating from other schools of selected discourses and of other schools than the Theravada school. And many of these chapters and books were originally passed down in Sanskrit or Prakrit. And then eventually they were translated also into Chinese language. And the Chinese version is referred to as the Agamas. And the Agamas are considered as on equal footing with the Pali Suttas. Even though they belong to different schools, they still belong to the very earliest strata of text. So even though nowadays we have schools which we would call Mahayana schools, and they have their own Mahayana sutras, but they also have in their Tipitaka these agamas. It's probably true they don't study these agamas a lot, because this is kind of the Hinayana material, but they also have that in their own corpus of texts. Whereas what they really study is then the later sutras that were developed like the Lotus Sutra, Diamond Sutra, Heart Sutra, but these are by far not early suttas. No of the early Buddhist texts speak of a Lotus Sutra, Heart Sutra. They are not found. But the Agamas, these are the parallels, these are the equivalent to the Pali suttas, to the discourses. Even though the Agamas belong to different schools. You already hear me say schools. What does that refer to? Different schools. Now we only have Theravada, Mahayana, is it? Then why do we speak about early Buddhism? What do we even mean with early? Actually, Wikipedia explains that early Buddhism can often refer to pre-sectarian Buddhism, which refers to the teachings and monastic organization and structure founded by Gautama Buddha. And Lambert Schmidhausen explains that the canonical period prior to the development of different schools with their different positions. That's what is meant with pre-sectarian Buddhism. So before the schools were going into different directions. So this is called pre-sectarian Buddhism or early Buddhism. I have prepared a slide from Wikipedia. I would like to look at that together with you. Let's have a look. Okay, so while Eric is trying to bring on the slide full screen, I will start to explain a little bit. So you can see here the different strata and developments in Buddhist history. And it starts out on top here with the early Sangha in India. So this is 450 before Christ, 450 before the Common Era, or even 500. This is the early Sangha. But then also from 250 before until, we would say, even something latest until 500, we still have quite a number of early Buddhist schools. Not just one or two, altogether 18. There were 18 Buddhist schools. And the Theravada that you see here is just one of them. But you can see it also continue here. And that's the only one that survived. But there were 17 others. But their texts have not survived, their tradition, they couldn't manage to have a continuous lineage of monks and nuns. So these schools died out. But some scriptures we still have from them. So these are the early Buddhist schools. And then we have here, down here, also in Asia, the same development of early Buddhist schools, which then also some of which developed into Mahayana doctrines. But at the beginning, there was no Mahayana. And then you can see here all the different schools and the different names. So quite a bit of development going on here, you can see. And the question is also, what are these early Buddhist schools? Well, let me show you the next slide. You can also see from Wikipedia, these are only the early 18 schools. Sthaviravada. This is what then is now called the Theravada. The speech or doctrine of the elders. And then Mahishasaka, Samastivada, Kashyapya. Many names you've probably never heard. Some of them I don't even know how to pronounce. So you can read it in your own free time if you like. But just to give you a bit of an overview. So these were 18 schools existing in the first, maybe not the first 100, but after 200 years, after Buddha's passing away, we already have a lot of development. Then going on for another 500, 600, 700 years. And the Theravada continued all the while, all the time until today. So fragments and scriptures of these other schools are actually still found and are still available. but not complete Tipitakas of these schools. So complete version we find only in the Pali version. So which of these schools and the texts of which schools are more reliable, which are less? Well, these early schools, we cannot say more or less reliable, because they all build on the same corpus of texts. And they made great efforts to maintain these texts. There's a small controversy. I think we don't need this slide anymore. Thank you. There's a small controversy. Some scholars speculate that maybe the Samyutta Nikaya or Samyukta Agama could be the earliest form or the earliest book. Why? Because in these texts there's mentioning of the Angas, which is a classification system that was used very early, where you can classify texts in prose and verse, or Q&A sessions, inspired utterances, and so on. But these were originally meant as textual styles, not as books. But some scholars also have misunderstood that or take that to mean that this refers to books. And since the Samyutta Nikaya and the Samyukta Agama is the only one that refers to this early classification system, they speculate that therefore this must be the earliest book of the Sutta Pitaka. But that has been shown by other scholars to be not a very reliable conclusion to draw. In fact, these early books, Tika, Majjhima, Anguttara Nikaya, and their parallels in the Agamas, they all, we cannot distinguish and say, well, this is earlier, this is later. So how were these texts, these early texts, how were they transmitted? Wouldn't that be good to know? Because if you put on all your faith and you want to do your practice, your meditation, you want to base that on the Buddha's teachings, wouldn't it be interesting to know how are we getting these Buddha's teachings? From where did we get them? How were they transmitted? Because obviously there was no YouTube around at the time, I assume. No MP3 recorders. So how did they transmit these texts? And how did you happen to hear the text at that time? Well, the only way you could hear the Dhamma is from somebody else who tells you by all means. And the only way to know it and to carry it was by memorizing. So to recite the Dhamma and to memorize, that was the way to maintain it and to pass it on from one generation to another. But this, some people say when they hear, oh, this was just passed on like this from one person to another, that sounds very unreliable. How can you trust that? You know, this is like telling a story and then you tell the next person and the person tells it to the third person. And the story that comes back is often very different from the original story. I think there's even a children's game they call the telephone game, isn't it? Where you whisper into the ear of your neighbor, my Aunt Mary has a baby. And then he or she tells to his neighbor, her neighbor, and then eventually it comes back. And then what you hear comes back is, my dog Derry has rabies. Very different, huh? My Aunt Mary has a baby, or my dog Derry has rabies. But this is not how the suttas were transmitted. We're lucky. The transmission of the suttas was actually much more sophisticated. They were not just retelling the content of the Buddha's words. No, they were memorizing it word by word, line by line, and reciting it together in groups, so that even if one person makes a mistake somewhere, it will be auto-corrected, almost like on WhatsApp, you have autocorrect function, right? Or on Facebook, autocorrect, you type something and then it says no, it corrects you. Sometimes the autocorrect is actually wrong and something funny can come out. And the same happens with the suttas. When the texts, not just the suttas, also Abhidhamma, commentaries, whatever was recited, but if you do it in a group, then if one person makes a mistake, then it gets corrected by the others, because it's very unlikely that everyone makes the same mistake at the same place. And it's good. So in this way, the quality maintains and is controlled. So it's not like the telephone game. So monks dedicated many hours of their day to memorizing and maintaining the Dhamma and teaching it to others. And it was written down the first time only about 100 before the Common Era in Sri Lanka, after the Fourth Council. That was the first time. But the first 400 years, it was transmitted orally. But then, what does it mean then for the early schools and for comparative study? Well, since these texts were transmitted orally, also they were kept in different languages and dialects. So they maintained, these different schools maintained their transmissions in different Indic languages, such as Sanskrit, or Uyghur, Gandhari. And they can be found in Northern Asian languages, also like Chinese or Tibetan. But then once a parallel has been located, nowadays, when we find a parallel, you can do a side-by-side comparison. So nowadays, all these texts that were scattered all over the Indian continent and beyond, finally, they come together. Scholars are collecting them and put them side by side and can see the similarities and the differences. And often the difference is actually quite minor. It's often maybe in the sequence of lists. What is number 3 here is number 2 in the other version. What is number 2 is number 4 somewhere else. But the content is surprisingly consistent. Venerable Anarya, who is a foremost scholar in early Buddhism and comparative studies, he writes in a book, in the introduction to his comparative study of the Majjhima Nikaya, on page 17, he explains, due to the vicissitudes of human memory and inevitability of error, like from time to time, one makes an error. However well a text is transmitted, mistakes will begin to creep into the collection. But with the aid of comparative study, such mistakes can be rectified. Because now we can put them side by side, and it's very unlikely that different editions made the same error at the same place. So if you have 4 versions, but one is different, you know with high probability that that version might have undergone some textual corruption during the time of oral transmission. And this is pretty much, now we have arrived at this point, this is pretty much how comparative study works. It is based on this principle of finding commonalities among these different versions of similar texts. And the principle is, well, things that are found in all of them are probably dating back all the way to the Buddha. But things that are maybe found only in one version, but all others have a different passage here, then that could point to some degree of textual corruption with that one version. But things that they all have in common have a high probability of authenticity. However, it does not mean just because some suttas maybe don't have a parallel, or we have not found one, that therefore this text is late. That would be a bit premature conclusion to reach. Why? As I said earlier, the Pali Suttas, they come from one source. The Pali Canon is a complete canon. But that's the only one of the early schools that has survived. Whereas the Chinese Agamas, they also have a Dirgha Agama. Dirgha Agama is the equivalent to the Digha Nikaya. They also have a Madhyama Agama, equivalent to the Majjhima Nikaya. They have a Samyukta Agama. What could that be? And they have an Ekottarika Agama, Anguttara. But they come from different schools. So they don't have it just all from the same school. Their Dirgha Agama comes from the Dhammaguptaka school. It's a different, one of the 18 schools. Whereas the Madhyama Agama comes most likely from the Sarvastivada school. Whereas the Samyukta Agama comes from the Mula Sarvastivada. It's a different one. To a high probability, maybe 80%. The Ekottarika Agama is a bit uncertain. Even scholars are debating, not 100% clear, but it's commonly nowadays attributed to the Mahasangika. So here we have it, 4 different books, but they all come from different schools that have then been translated and brought into Chinese translation and brought to China. But they're not from one school. So if we're looking for a parallel of a Pali Sutta, say a sutta you like very much or you find interesting or something strange, and you want to find a parallel, often you find the parallel, and then you have them side by side, and you can see, oh, it's exactly the same, or there's a small difference here or there. But sometimes we don't know, we don't have a parallel. But that does not mean that therefore this sutta must be late. Why? Why would this be a premature conclusion? Remember, the Chinese Agamas, they have their Sutta Pitaka from different schools. And different schools put into their Majjhima Nikaya and Samyutta Nikaya different suttas. So what one school might have put into their Samyutta Nikaya, another one will put into their Anguttara. And if it's a longer sutta, what that school puts in their Anguttara, the next one maybe has it already in their Majjhima Nikaya. So in the end, what can happen is that since the Chinese has suttas and books from different schools, it can be that certain suttas come 2 times, because what one school put in that book, the other one put in the other book, but the Chinese has it from now these 2 different schools, not the same sutta comes twice. But what can also happen is that you don't have it at all, because we have the Madhyama version from the Sarvastivada, the Majjhima Nikaya version from the Sarvastivada school, but a certain sutta maybe they have put into the Anguttara Nikaya version. But the Anguttara version in the Chinese Agamas come from the Mahasangika school. They might have put that same sutta into their Samyukta Agama. So we don't have it in the Chinese version, even though it could have been there. Just a matter of transmission and having lost these books. So we cannot make a strong argument from absence. Even in philosophy, an argument of absence is a very weak argument. But if you find parallels and then you see differences, then that can be interesting. So what are the takeaways and conclusions that one can draw from these comparative studies? Because that's what we want to know. I know most of you are not scholars. I'm also not a scholar, actually. I'm mostly interested in meditation and in practice. I got into this whole interest only because I wanted to know how to practice, what to practice. So a kind of interest and curiosity was aroused in these studies, but not for their own sake. But then what are the takeaways and conclusions from those comparative studies? In fact, if you put all these suttas and agamas side by side, they are very consistent, almost no difference. The Vinaya, same, very consistent. Often the origin stories behind a rule is not exactly the same in different schools, but the rules themselves are consistent, the Patimokkha, and so on. But interestingly, the Abhidhammas from different schools, they are completely all over the place. It's almost like they have never seen each other. They are very different from each other. So that's interesting, isn't it? The Suttas and Vinaya are so similar, whereas the Abhidhammas from different schools are so different. Venerable Analio has noticed that also, and I will show you in the next slide what is his takeaway from that. He says that suffice it to say that these divergent schools were not dissimilar in their Vinayas nor in their collection of discourses, but instead how they differentiated and identified themselves were through their Abhidhammas. And there's an interesting aspect here. It's differentiating and also identifying. Because if you're a group or a school of Buddhism, in order to have an identity as a separate group, you should have something different from all others. If everybody says the same, well, how are you a different group? So quite natural that these 18 schools will differentiate themselves mainly through the Abhidhammas. And this is where the debates would happen, where all the scholarship would be invested, because this is where people would see the differences and where you might identify with and get interested.
Let's take a break and enjoy Awakening to Sign the Light hymn, a beautiful musical interlude.
Light a candle in darkness, turning gloom to bright, delivering all from darkness, passing through this sorrow night. Let us start this cleansing light. Let it shine and shine it bright. How to burn it bright, who's our source and our guide. Let the Buddha be our teacher, and the Dharma be our light. And with practice we may ensure we will reach that glorious height. Light brings you peace and joy, helping all to come together. Don't hold on, tell your brother, pass it on and tell them why. Help the blind truth to find. With no time, light up your mind. With one aim, let us strive for the happiness of mankind. Let the Buddha be our teacher, and the Dharma be our light. And in practice we may ensure we will room to bright, like a candle for others, when the bloom to bright.
We are delighted to introduce Buddhist nuns who are well versed in the Dhamma, ready to share their wisdom with peace-loving listeners worldwide. To inaugurate this series of Dhamma talks by Buddhist nuns, we are honored to have the Venerable Dr. Bhikkhuni Nirodha deliver her sermon on the topic, the message of the Buddha.
Samanta Chakravalesu Atra Gachandu Devata Saddhammang Muni Rajasa Sunantu Sabha Mokkadam Dhammasavana Kalo Ayam Bhadanta Dhammasavana Kalo Ayam Bhadanta Dhammasavana Kalo Ayam Bhadanta Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Sabba papassa akaranang kusalassa upasampada sacitta pariyodapanang etang buddhana sasanam. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. With permission of the Mahasangha, may I speak about Dhamma. Dear devotees and practitioners of the Dhamma, so today we are gathered due to the organization of the Buddhist Mahavihara Malaysia for another Dhamma sharing. So before I embark on an explanation of the Gatha, which is the main topic of today's Dhamma talk, I would like to explain a few important aspects of listening to Dhamma. Now, if I ask you, why do you listen to Dhamma? And all of you will reply, that's an easy question to answer. We listen to Dhamma because we want to learn Dhamma, which is true. But Lord Buddha has explained that listening to Dhamma Deshana, which is called Dhamma Savana in Pali, is a pathway to Nibbana. Lord Buddha has explained that Dhamma Deshana, that is conducting Dhamma, like these Dhamma talks, giving Dhamma talks, Dhamma Deshana, Dhamma Savana, listening to Dhamma, Dhamma Sadgayana, chanting the Dhamma, contemplating of Dhamma, and meditation are all 5 different pathways to Nibbana. Now some of you may have already known this. And you might think, oh, I already know this fact. That's great. Some of you might go, I learned something new today. But if you just learn this as a bit of knowledge, as some knowledge, that's not enough. We have to ask the question, how is it possible, or what did Lord Buddha mean when Dhamma Savana, listening to Dhamma as a pathway to Nibbana? We have to know why it was explained as a path to Nibbana. Okay? Because Dhamma is explained well in the beginning, well in the middle, and well in the end. This has also been explained. So there is a way to listen to Dhamma so that we can develop our prajna, our wisdom, which will help us to end all suffering. What is the way? So Lord Buddha explained that there are 4 parts to listening to Dhamma, which is the first one is called Attikatva Dhamman Sunati. That means when you listen to Dhamma Deshana, you need to contemplate about how valuable Dhamma is. Dhamma is the only way that we can end this samsaric journey, end all suffering. Okay? And how rare it is. The preciousness of Dhamma, and how fortunate you are to be able to listen to Dhamma. And so when you understand how rare Dhamma is and how precious Dhamma is, you will develop Shraddha. You will see the importance. So you will give the highest priority that you can in your life to listen to and learn Dhamma. You will realize that we have not been able to have this supreme chance, very, very gifted, very valuable opportunity in our samsaric journey before. And this might be our only chance to listen to Dhamma and to realize Dhamma. So all of us have to get the most out of this opportunity. So when you contemplate like that, you will develop Shraddha, and you will have keenness to listen to Dhamma. Okay, that is what it means by Attikatva Dhammasanati. You develop keenness by contemplating about these facts about Dhamma. Then the second one is called Manasikatva Dhammansunati. That means just like how drops of water gets collected in a pot, drop by drop, and even if it is drop by drop, finally the pot will be full. Just like that, every little fact or piece of information, Dhamma information, you will collect keenly with an avid interest. You don't put anything away, and you get it inside your mind. Okay? You contemplate about the Dhamma. You try to understand the different layers of Dhamma. You try to understand the deep meanings of Dhamma. Okay? Then you will understand Dhamma deeper and deeper. So that's called Manasikatva Dhammansunati. Then the third one is Sabban Chetaso Samannaharitva Dhammansunati. That means you would not put any Dhamma facts or pieces of information away, just like you are making a garland, right? By attaching one flower at a time. So you attach one flower, then another flower, and so on. You will make a nice garland. Just like that, you will understand the links. Why did the speaker say this as the first one? Why then here the bhikkhuni or the monk went down to the other one? So you understand the underlying message, the links, the theme of the Dhamma talk. Okay, so you understand where you are and where the full path. You might not have gone there, achieved the higher mental status, but you understand the path. You understand the links between the flow of the message. That is called Sabbam Chetaso Samannaharita Dhammanjana. Finally, when you understand, you understand how important Dhamma is, how valuable Dhamma is, and you try to get it into your mind and understand the hidden messages, understand the links from where you are, how what is the path to go through to end the suffering. When you understand all those things, finally, Rohita Soto Dhammanjanati, you listen to Dhamma as if you are meditating. You don't look anywhere, up or down, left or right. You sit, your body is still, your mind is still, and you are a keen listener. You take everything in. Your mind doesn't stray away at all. When you listen to Dhamma like this, you will be able to understand the Dhamma and realize the Four Noble Truths essential to end all this suffering. So I just wanted to explain this, take a few minutes and explain this, because this will help you to not only to gain knowledge about how to listen to Dhamma, but try to see whether you are listening to Dhamma like this. Are there any shortcomings in your practice of listening to Dhamma? If, how can I correct this? That is why we listen to Dhamma. We want to develop ourselves. We want to improve our practices. Okay? So now I hope you understood how to improve your practice about listening to Dhamma. Now let us move on to what the topic of or the theme of the talk, message of the Lord Buddha. Okay. Now we all of us are familiar with what we call Buddha Sasana. We say Buddha Sasana. We are very fortunate to be alive when the Buddha Sasana is alive, when the Dhamma is alive. Okay? What is Buddha Sasana? Buddha Sasana means the message of the Buddha, message of the Supreme Buddha. Now, the Gata, Sabba Papa Sakaranam, Kusalasya Upasampada, Sachitta Pariyodapanam, Etam Buddhana Sasana. That Gata tells you or explains the core message of all the Buddhas. Okay, it says this is the advice of all the Buddhas. Now we know the meaning. We have heard this Gatha so many times. We know that it means don't do any evil, don't do anything wrong, and then be good, do only the good things. Clean your mind, and that is the advice of all the Buddhas, which is one way of interpreting this Gatha. But this Gatha has a very deep meaning. That is what I wanted to talk about today. Okay? So if you take the first line of that Gatha, the first line says Sabba Papa Sakaram. Be away or don't do any evil. Be away, get rid of all evil. Now some of you might think that is about not doing any unwholesome actions. That is also, again, one interpretation. But one cannot eradicate all evil just by being away from the 10 unwholesome actions. We have to dig deeper than that. This has a deeper meaning than that. Okay, let's see what that means. Lord Buddha explains that there is a root cause for all evil. There's a root cause for all the unwholesome actions, words, and thoughts that happen. And the root cause is avijja and bhava tanha. I will explain what these are. Avijja and bhava tanha are the root causes of all the unwholesome actions, words, and thoughts that we perform moment by moment. Okay. So, what is avijja, and how does this relate to other aspects, other kilesa like lobha, dosa, moha? Okay. Now, our perception is that all of us were born into an existing world, and we are consuming, we are interacting with an existing world, and one day we will die, leaving this world behind. But Lord Buddha explained that the world actually becomes alive, or the world will come into fruition through the senses. Even though we think that the world exists before we come and we will leave it when we die, Lord Buddha says the world is becomes alive, is born sort of through the senses. The world comes into existence through the senses. Now, in our world, we have all sorts of people, like mothers, fathers, daughters, sons, husbands, wives, and so on, friends, colleagues, monks, nuns, and so on. Right? That is what our world consists of. But Lord Buddha explains that there is an outside world. However, that outside world consists of objects, which we call rupa. All these rupas are a combination, is formed through a combination of four basic elements: Patavi, Apo, Tejo, and Vayu. If you're not familiar with those words, it's the earth, water, fire, and air. Okay, so anything, even if you call this body or the table or the laptop, everything has different combinations, different percentages of Patavi, Apo, Tejo, Vayu. And it has come together and formed different shapes in the space. Okay? Even though we say in our world we have all these people like mother, father, daughter, son, and so on, Lord Buddha says, yes, in the world you get all the objects, all the rupas are Satra Mahadhatu, consists of Patavi, Apo, Tejo, Vayu. But they have different shapes. Now let me just explain a little bit here. Now if you take a lump of clay, which is basically Patavi, okay, but of course it has Apo. Here one thing to remember is Apo is not really water. That means that the stickiness, how that stickiness in liquids can keep the Patavi together. The best example is when you make roti or parati or those things, or pizza, how you put, when you have flour, how you put water and then it sticks together. That shows that water has that stickiness that can keep the pottery together. Okay, so you have pottery and you have this lump of clay and you mold it like in a pottery class. You mold it, you can make a pot, and you can say, oh, that's a nice pot. Now can you see that it was made up of clay? No, your mind is now going, oh, that's a pot, that's a beautiful pot. Okay, now the pottery, the aspect of pottery is not very prominent. We see the pot. And then let's say you take that you convert it to lump of clay again. Now the clay is more prominent. You make a rabbit. Same clay. You haven't changed anything. You make a rabbit. Now you say, oh, what a beautiful rabbit. Well done. Okay? Now you have an attachment to the rabbit. You don't see the lump of clay. Okay? And again, if you convert it to the lump of clay and you make a child. Now you say, oh, a very nice child. Now what happened? The same lump of clay, the same pottery, you had different shapes. And with every shape, you have an attachment. You form an attachment. When you do that, you don't see the pottery. You see the shape. Now, if I ask you, is the shape the rabbit? You would say no. If I ask, is the shape the child? You would say no. But what we can see is only the shape. Okay, let me explain that a bit further. This is very important. When you have something like an object in front of you, like in front of your eyes, we will not be able to see that object without a light source. You need to have light in order to see the object. Object means rupa, Satra Mahadhatu. Okay? Even if you have light and you have the rupa, right? What happens? You have from the light source, it reflects it. You get a light source on the object and it reflects a certain part. Okay, and then you get an image on your retina. Okay, now we said that the object is made from this Patavi Apu Tejo wire, but what you get is only the shape or the reflected beam of light that will form an image on the retina. Okay, that means you're not getting any information about whether this person, whether that object is a person or mother or daughter or son, nothing like that. Just a being. We say that is called Upada Rupa in Dhamma. That means you get the shape. Why? Because our eyes are not powerful enough to see what is actually in the outside world. Now we all know the bodies that we call ours have cells in them. They're made up of, other smaller ones and electrons, protons, and all these things we have learned. But can we see any of them without a microscope? No, we can't. So are we seeing what is actually there in the outside world? No. We are only seeing the upadharupa or the shape. In fact, we are only seeing the light that is reflected off from the rupa or the object. So when you get that light beam, it forms an image on the retina. There was no knowledge of whether that was a person or whether it was your daughter, son, or mother, father, husband, wife, nothing like that. Just a being of light. And then it creates an image on the retina. Even that image depends on the quality of your eye or the lens. What do I mean by that? That image that you are getting, that is formed on your retina, is formed on the basis of the quality of your lens. That means if you are colorblind, the image you are getting is different from what I am getting because I don't have colorblind. If I have cataract, then I have what the image I am getting is different from someone else's. So that means we cannot see what is in the actual world. We will only be able to see what is given or what is formed by the eye, by the lens in the eye. Even then, that won't stay long. It creates the image, then the light beam just has done its job and the image doesn't stay there, it just vanishes. Okay? And then what happens? Then the nerve system is stimulated and you get a signal that is called sanya. I'm explaining it using the science because it's easier to understand that way. So you're getting a signal and it goes to the visual cortex and you go, oh, that's my friend. That's how you think that you see the external world. What happens? You got an image which is dependent on the quality of your lens. Nothing, no knowledge came from the outside when you look at when you think you saw an object, and then it ceases to exist. The image is produced and then it ceases to exist, and then you get the sanya, the signal going through. That's an electrical signal, and you identify that as your friend or your colleague. Did we get we only got a light beam from the outside world. Now the issue is we understand, okay, that is our friend, but that is something to do within our mind, something to do with the mind formation. But what do? We always go and connect it to the object. We think we saw our friend, but we didn't get any notion of friend from outside. We only got an electronic beam, light beam from the outside. Now you might go, how can we live like that? The issue is, as long as you try to see things, try to look outward, your mind accepts the fact that all these things, the mother, father, and all these things live in the outside world. You cannot escape from the lobha, dosa, or the moha that people live in the outside world exists, that an outside world exists. That perception you cannot escape. But when you go through the process, you will be able to understand that we are the ones, or our mind is the one who forms all these concepts, who forms the basis to have this tanha to the outside world. Bhava tanha means that. Bhava means outside world. Okay? So we give values, we form we as in the mind forms the values, and the mind not only forms values but it also attaches to the outside world. Now we don't see the Satra Mahadhatu, we don't see the reality. What we see is a brother, sister, monk, nun, and so on. Now, as a consequence of this, what happens? Now those Satra Mahadhatu, we don't see the Satra Mahadhatu, just like the lump of clay I was talking about. Now these things are valuable things for us. Now they are valuable. If you see something as, if your mind can see, your panya can see the reality, then you won't have this suffering. But every time you attach a value to a Satra Mahadhatu, the way during this process, then what happens is you are forming the ground to suffer. Why? Because even if you have attached a value to the Satra Mahadhatu, that will evolve, that will break, that will cease to exist. It will present its true nature. What is the nature? Impermanent. Now what happens? You have this mental formation that you cannot permanently attach to that rupa, nama rupa. Right? Because of that inability, you will suffer when the object breaks, when the Satra Mahadhatu ceases to exist. We don't understand that we are the ones who form the values, who gave the values, who assigned values to different Satra Mahadhatu, different shapes. We haven't seen, we cannot see the Satra Mahadhatu through the naked eye. We can only see the shapes. Okay? But because of our avidya, because we don't know about this process, we think we can see what is in the what we have formed here from the outside. Now this is called Sakkaya Ditthi. Sakkaya means what you have done inside, that is the mental formation. Ditthi means you are using that to see the outside world, like perspective. Okay, Sakkaya, what is in the inside, what we have formed in the inside. Ditthi means you are seeing the outside world through that value system.
ආයත තුංග සොසන්දීත නාසෝ ගෝපමුඛෝ ආබිනීලසු නිත්තෝ.
Well, that's all for today. If you have any concerns or questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at info@buddhadharmatv.com. Thank you for watching, and I'm sure that our programs on Buddha Dharma TV will be a source of inspiration from many peace lovers around the globe. Good night. Namo Buddhaya.